Welcome to the Lift Oneself podcast, Ebonie.
Thank you for having me.
How is your heart doing?
Depends on the day, I'd say. I don't know how to answer how my heart is doing, to be honest.
Take a moment, close your eyes, and check in with yourself.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is probably I'm feeling lonely. So I'm just feeling a little bit isolated, lonely, and the fear of missing out. But what am I missing out on if everybody else is in lockdown and isolation as well? Kind of feels like time is passing, but we're at a standstill.
But it feels really weird to feel like you're missing out, yet you're not.
You're right. It does. And I have to keep reminding myself there's still a 2 at the beginning of my age. I'm still in my 20s. Like there's still so much time, although there isn't.
I appreciate you being honest with that reflection. I think possibly you're able to hold the non-duality of the two, because the mind sometimes wants to go dualistic and pick just one side. Yet because you have navigated through grief so much that you understand that nothing is a guarantee.
Nothing is permanent.
And so you really understand the impermanence of things. The world gives us certain definitions that this is how life is going to be. Yet in your experience, you know that not to be true.
Right.
You know that it doesn't matter what age, it doesn't matter what health. If death is coming, death is coming.
Doesn't matter how much you love that person. Doesn't matter how much you pray to spare that person. When it's their time, it's their time.
Yeah.
You have no control.
No. I asked you to come onto the podcast asking if you would be willing to talk about mental health. And you graciously said yes right away. Could you elaborate a little bit more on when you first started realizing, and what was the experience that had you recognize these places and these spots inside you?
I would have been probably about 17 when I first started to feel depression, I'd say. It was the first time that I wasn't looking at life through rose-colored lenses. It was the first time I realized, oh, okay, this is what stress feels like. This is what it feels like to really hurt. This is what it feels like to be lost. This is what it feels like to be alone. These were feelings I'd never experienced until I was actually almost 18. This may sound small, but I had a boyfriend at a way too young age in retrospect. And we were together for a very long time. So through all of our formative years, really. And I think at the age of about 17 was when we started to grow up and grow apart. Having this person who was like everything, like I didn't know anything else. Taking something on, like a relationship that deep at such a young age, comes with things that we were way too young to be dealing with at the time. That's when I really started to feel like deep, deep pain, to be completely honest, betrayal. And then when I was 18 to 19, my grandfather, who lived with me for a lot of my life, was just like everything to me. He started to get sick and frail. And I remember that was my first time feeling like super anxious. Like I couldn't really sleep. I was always worried. I was constantly worried and stressed about what was happening with my grandfather because he was in Jamaica. And then at 19, I eventually lost my grandfather very suddenly. And that was by far the hardest loss. It was my first close loss and a very difficult one. And then 9 months later, my grandmother, who I was also very close with, we share a birthday, we were just always very, very close. She passed away 9 months later. I was already traumatized from that because I remember my grandfather, the day he passed away. And like I said, I was so anxious. I was so stressed. I worked at a nursing home at the time, and I was just doing everything I could to get things to help him, get a nurse in Jamaica to take care of him, like get everything to basically just make sure he stayed alive as long as possible. And I remember it was Mother's Day weekend 10 years ago, and he kind of bounced back, and he was strong, and we were all so excited. I remember it was a Saturday night, and I was like crying tears of joy. And then Monday, I was home, and I woke up to a phone call from my dad, like with a very calm, quiet voice. and he told me that my grandfather had passed away. I just never felt anything like that. He had just picked my mom up from work, and they were on their way home, but I was alone. And I remember just calling a cousin of mine who had just found out, and we sat on the phone for maybe an hour just screaming. I just didn't know what to do. From then, I was always afraid of receiving phone calls, especially when I was sleeping. Like I said, 9 months later, March 2012, I was sleeping and I had the house phone in my bedroom. House phones were a thing back then. And I picked up the phone, and my uncle was like sounding very frantic. And I was like, is everything okay? And he's like, no, everything is not okay. And I was like, oh, my dad was in the shower. I got up, I brought the phone to him in the shower because I couldn't handle hearing the news. My anxiety would not let me. And then I heard my dad turn off the water, go in the room to my mom. Next thing you know, I hear my mom screaming. I locked my door and I just covered my ears because I knew someone had died. I didn't want to know who. So I really spent that entire day locked in my room while my mom was screaming and everybody else was screaming, and I didn't even know who died. Eventually, I pieced it together by hearing through the walls that it was my grandma who passed away. That was March of 2012. 2013, September 16th is my birthday. I was in Toronto. My dad called and said that Uncle Nixon was on his way to the hospital. I'm not sure what's wrong. And I was kind of worried, but come on, like, it's Uncle Nixon. He's a young, agile guy. He'll be fine. Like, I know he'd have problems with his knees, sometimes his head, so it's fine. He'll be fine. But I was also kind of like weirded out by that, just by the tone in my dad's voice. And also because he had just wished me a happy birthday on Facebook. So it was just like, huh? Like, that was quick. I remember I was getting on a flight to come back home, and I was next in line to check in. And my phone rang, and it was my sister with a cousin because they were planning a surprise birthday party for me that Uncle Nixon was supposed to be at. So people were over at our house, and my sister was just crying. And I knew, once again, all of this happened in a very short time. A lot of it had to do with phone calls. Usually I was asleep or away from my family. Mm-hmm. So now I have this anxiety of being away, being too far away, going to sleep. I had issues sleeping for a while, insomnia, because I was just so anxious, especially because I live in another city. That just amplified my anxiety.
I want to bring the listener in to understand the intimate details of why this would be so impactful to you that they may have not really heard you say. That you and your grandmother shared the same birthday.
Right.
And when did she pass away?
She actually passed away the day before, on March 2nd, 2012. My uncle, who passed away in 2013, his birthday is March 3rd. So she died the day before his birthday.
And then your uncle passed away when?
The following year on her birthday, which is also my birthday. I remember that first birthday without her was just strange. And then it's also, I felt like I understood my family's grief, of course, but it was just very difficult. Like, it was like, I can't open Facebook. I cannot go on Instagram. Like, I just have to avoid social media. It got to the point where, like, I remember I was in Edmonton. I was living in Edmonton, and I had a birthday. I think it was my 24th birthday. And by now, my uncle has passed. Grandma's passed. September 16th is just a strange day. And I cried the entire day. Like, I could not stop crying. And I was trying so hard because I'm like, it's my birthday. My friends are trying to celebrate, trying to take me out. Let's go shopping. Let's do something. But I just couldn't. I just had to cry. I literally closed the blind, closed the door, and cried. And everybody who called me, I was crying. I couldn't hold it in. The following birthday, I made it a point to say, like, maybe I should just be away from my family. Like, maybe I need to run away. So I'd always leave Ottawa. On September 16th, they're going to Uncle Nixon's grave. They're going, and rightfully so. You know, we all share a day now. Yeah. But it was just very difficult for me. And it almost felt like there was some kind of, like, my birthday was this weird day where something bad was going to happen, you know? There were just too many things tied to it. So I started to kind of expect something to go wrong, expect something to happen. So I just felt the need to remove myself and almost pretend nothing was happening. I honestly didn't realize that everybody didn't feel this way. I thought everybody felt what I was feeling. And I didn't know everybody wasn't feeling what I was feeling until actually one day I came home. I was at Carleton, and at the time I was taking like a course overload, working full time. And it was my first, I think it was my first year with the government. So it was all brand new, too much, but I feel like I could always do too much. I remember just, it was probably winter and it was dark and I was just over it. I was tired and just being depressed. Like every day I felt like I weighed 1,000 pounds, like everything was just heavy. And I was just so unhappy without realizing I was so unhappy. And I don't remember how the conversation came up, but I was talking to my dad. I may have started crying or something as usual. I don't remember how it started, like I said, but I do remember saying, like, have you never thought of suicide? He was like, never. He was so shocked that I said that. He was like, I've never once, like, so many things have happened in my life, and I've never once thought to kill myself. And I was just stunned. Like, you never thought about killing yourself? Like, I didn't know people didn't think about this all the time. Like, I thought everybody got to the point of feeling so weighed down, so unhappy, so like stuck. Like, there's no way out. I thought that crossed everybody's mind at some point, you know. But it wasn't until then that my father, who is 26 years older than me, so many more things have happened in his life. At the time, his father was very sick and they gave him, like, I think a few months at the time to live. I'm thinking, you're looking at your father go through all this pain. At this point, my grandma had passed away and you haven't thought to kill yourself? It was just a very big awakening for me to realize that my feelings were not, I don't want to say the norm, but I didn't have to feel that way, right? That was the first time I started to consider, maybe I do need therapy. Maybe I do need some form of medication, because I've always been afraid of medication and becoming dependent on it. And it was the first time I thought, wow, maybe I should consider this, because I don't think it's safe to feel like, uh-oh, I'm stuck. This is my one way out, you know?
Did you ever get help?
I did, actually. I think I avoided it for a while. I just felt like, first of all, I knew I was depressed and anxious, but I was going through life feeling just fine. Like I could manage it. I had it under control. And it wasn't actually until 2018 when I think it was like a weekend of one thing after the other. And it was actually Ariel's birthday weekend. And if you know me, you know how important Ariel is to me. Her birthday is like a national holiday for me. Like, nothing comes in the way of Ariel's birthday. And I remember so many things were happening leading up to her birthday. And I literally called, like crying, called some therapist's office and said, I need to come in. Like, I need to talk to somebody. They scheduled me for her birthday. And I went in kind of feeling like I got this. Next thing you know, I am crying, disgusting snot, like bringing up things from when I was like 16 years old. And I'm embarrassed because I'm like, where is this coming from? Like, I had no idea I was suppressing all of these things. Like, I'm walking around every day with all this on my shoulders and I had no idea. So that was very therapeutic. That first session, I know a lot of people say they don't get much out of their first session, but I probably got the most out of my first session. So I let it all out and I heard what the therapist had to say. And that was probably everything I needed. Like, it was just, I don't remember all the sessions after that.
Your grandfather passed away in 2011 to 2018. Did you have anyone that you could confide in, that you could talk with?
Yes. And thank God for them. There are three, I call them my three gems, who I can say anything to. Sometimes I really do feel sorry for them with all the things I lay on them.
What is the difference between them and a therapist?
Maybe my friends tell me what I want to hear at times. They probably don't give me that raw, like what I really need. Whereas the therapist doesn't have anything to lose. They're going to tell me what I need to hear. It's their job to do that.
That's where a lot of people will avoid a therapist, because it feels like it's a stranger and how can I open myself up? yet not allowing themselves to see that when somebody knows you very intimately, they have biases and it can be difficult to be honest with you because they understand that certain things that they may say to you may trigger more emotions.
Very true.
And it is very difficult to witness that in somebody else. Yet if you understand the benefit of helping somebody to come out of their own suffering.
And I do feel like it's a little easier to speak to a therapist, as crazy as that may sound, but they don't know me and I don't have to deal with them on a daily basis. Whatever I say, no matter how hard it is to hear, they can handle it. Whereas, as I've expressed, I've had some pretty deep feelings that not everybody can handle, like thoughts of suicide and things like that, like major, major depression. And it's hard to put that on people who I know love and care about me because that just hurts them, you know. It stresses them out. I, I don't want them to know these things. Like, even I know my parents know these things about me, like know my struggles with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. And I see how it affects them, like how much it hurts them. And there are people as much as I'm speaking about this obviously very publicly, there are people I would never want to hear that I'm thinking or feeling that way, just because I don't ever want them to feel that pain for me.
What I love about your story too is your self-acceptance. You need acceptance of yourself to be able to be transparent and be self-aware. I understand the stigma in the world that's still here about mental health and suicide. And the self-acceptance of that is huge. You're standing in your truth. And it takes the work to be able to stand in your truth and to be able to talk about it so confidently. Because when you show that, you know that that's going to hit some people's narratives that they don't want to accept that. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that.
Okay.
Yet your self-acceptance is huge. You didn't see that before?
Nope.
Imagine what you have to accept of yourself to be able to say that.
Yeah. But I just know I'm very self-aware, but that's where it ends. Like, I didn't think of it as me accepting myself. So that's new.
Mental health is a responsibility within. And when you become overwhelmed, the strongest, courageous thing you can do is ask for help. You do not have to do it alone. I think there's not enough dialogue around suicide.
I agree.
Because the only way that you can get help or you can change is by acknowledging something. And if you don't have a space to be able to be open without people trying to change your truth, you're not able to acknowledge anything.
And then you also have to think about people who, like you said, there are people who don't talk about these things because of religious reasons or just their upbringing, cultural differences, personality types. And then, you know, those are the people who are actually more likely to commit suicide, to actually act on their thoughts. They probably do have the support system, but they didn't ever reach out for the support. And that's the scary part about the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And the lack of dialogue and the stigma surrounding talking about it.
What is one stigma you would love to erase?
There are so many stigmas I would love to erase.
Name them off.
The stigma surrounding mental health, first of all, just because we're on the topic, and I just can't believe that people still think that you're weak if you're depressed.
It almost feels like an inconvenience to speak your truth because it makes other people uncomfortable.
It makes other people uncomfortable, and it makes that there are still people out there who are going to hear this, or if I ever said it to them, they're like, you are weak, you're unstable, you know, all these things. But if you want me to be completely honest, I feel like I'm one of the stronger people I know, right? Because I can open up, I can talk about this, and your thoughts don't actually affect me. What you think is your problem. Depression, anxiety, all these things, a lot of them have a genetic component. You know, a lot of these things happen before you even know yourself. You know, you become predisposed to certain things and you had nothing to do with it. You were in your mother's womb or at a very young age. You're not to blame. It's okay. Clearly, I have anxiety. let me just give an example. Like before I had my anxiety under control, and before I knew I had generalized anxiety disorder, I remember my brother was crying. He was in another room and I heard him crying. My mom was in Jamaica. Immediately, I froze. I was literally paralyzed with fear because, you know, the people, your parents, your siblings, those are the closest people to you, right? Your children, if you have children. Something happens to any of them. Like for me, I don't know what I would do. I don't want to think about it. But my mom, I believe she was even with Ariel. And I was thinking, he got some kind of news that was bad. So I froze and I just cried. I couldn't bring myself to go into the other room to see what was wrong with him because my brother doesn't cry. So it has to be something terrible. And I can't hear it. I don't want to know. And I was on the phone with somebody and I remember him saying, like, he thought I was crazy. He did not understand anxiety. He didn't understand that I had no control over what was happening. It was just a response to how I've been programmed to think due to my own traumas, right?
Have you ever brought in another word for that part is empathy?
Which part?
When you heard your brother crying and it froze you, rather than the anxiety, it's the empathy of recognizing I'm going to feel what he's feeling and he's possibly going to say something that's going to make me as vulnerable as he is. So it's empathizing.
I've never thought of it that way, no. But good way of looking at it. And, you know, my brother was just going through his own, you know, he's just having a bad day and he cried and it's okay to cry. But I was just not used to hearing my brother cry. So my mind started to create all these scenarios so quickly. Like I didn't even have time to think things through, like logically and rationally. Like it was just an automatic reaction. And I wish people understood that, whether it's PTSD or ADHD, learning disabilities, like like a lot of things, you just simply cannot control them. And it really upsets me when people are like, it's mind over matter.
When you hear sadness with your family members, you have not been able to allow yourself to allow them to have their own emotions.
I guess not.
And so anytime that they're upset, oh my gosh, the hot potatoes coming towards me.
But I think that also comes with being like an empath, because it doesn't matter what people are feeling, I'm going to feel it. And I think that's also where my depression and anxiety stem from, because I'm so hypersensitive. So
See,
I
you
think
just
that's
brought the empath, and you see how just a minute ago when you used anxiety for seeing your brother and I said empathy, you were like, I hadn't seen it that way.
You're right. I've always known that I was more sensitive than others. Like something happens and I'm so affected and other people are just like, moving on, you know? I've always kind of known that, like, for example, I think this comes with being the hypersensitive and just aware, just always being very observant and studying people. But I've always known that people were not comfortable with themselves. Like, and that's another reason why I think I've always liked to keep to myself. I have very few friends. I'm not out there like that. You're not going to see me on social media like that. But it just always felt kind of fake, you know, like, and that's probably what I was feeling, this fake sense of happiness and security. And when this pandemic started, I was like, okay, I'm not crazy. I was feeling this all along because I started to see people who seemed to have it all together completely come undone, all because there was nowhere else to hide. They had to sit at home, confront themselves, confront whoever they were in a relationship with. You know, there are a lot of people out there who really don't like themselves. They don't like to be alone with themselves. They don't want to confront their thoughts. They haven't learned themselves. They don't know themselves. And then often people who don't know themselves end up with a partner they don't even really know, because how could you be in a secure, healthy relationship when you aren't even secure and healthy within yourself? So I just observed a lot of that since March 2020. And I've just realized that it's not a me problem. It's not a person, you know, if you have thoughts that are out of the ordinary or feelings that are out of the ordinary, and people don't understand. They just haven't discovered that part of themselves yet.
Is there anything that you would like to tell the listeners?
Well, what I would say is be careful how you treat people. Be careful of your perceptions of people, just because few people would ever know like the demons I am battling or have battled, you know? There have definitely been times where people have no idea how much that little thing they said, or that little, just like a little action, like really kind of, I was already at the edge and you pushed me a little bit, you know? And I just think people should be careful. Like, you just never know what people are going through. You just don't know. And you could be so close, family, or feel like you know someone so well and you just don't. Be careful, be kind, listen, observe.
I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate you opening up, and I don't take this lightly. I also thank you for giving the gift for other people to open up, to see that, you know what, I don't have to be alone in this.
Thank you for allowing me this platform to speak about my struggles with mental health and grief and loss. I really appreciate you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. Please subscribe to our podcast, and where possible, leave a review. Check out our sponsors in the show notes. And until next time, please be kind and gentle with yourself. You matter.